Catherine, before we do dive into specific themes of the books and 100 million questions that I do have for you, I'd love to start with the reasons behind designing success. Like, what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so really the inspiration came. I was actually just playing with my daughter in her playroom. I had recently left the meet group, and I got a call from one of my best friends, Alyssa, and she was so upset. She was, I could tell she was holding back tears, and she was just under so much pressure. So she had been in her current role for a while, and basically people kept quitting, and she kept being like saddled with all of their work, and she kept being told she was going to be promoted but nothing was happening, and she was just kind of getting to her breaking point. And then on top of that, she had two kids under 4, and she was just like, I feel like I'm too snappy with them, and she felt like she was just kind of barely hanging on. And I felt it was such a universal experience that we're getting this burnout, that we're people are just kind of adapting to their work situations and not realizing what it means for the rest of their life, and also not realizing that we do have the agency to try to put in boundaries and try to do things to kind of shape the world we're living in. And so that was kind of the reason I wrote Designing Successes, because I feel like, not to say I don't get overwhelmed and burnt out too, of course I do, but I feel through my experience building my company. So like I said, I started it when I was 15. So I had to navigate all of life while building a huge thing, while still having to, have the normal parts of my identity, being a student, eventually, you know, you know, dating, meeting my husband, having children, like, all of that, as and of my other interests too, like running, and maintaining those identities while still building something. And I know it's possible. And so I wanted to share, how I managed to navigate that, and lessons I learned from doing it. Cause obviously it's a lot of failure along the way of like, okay, well, how do you make life work while still trying to, reach your goals, reach your professional goals?
Yeah, and I know you mentioned the list as well. Actually, your book has a lovely blend of, I think, personal stories, like links to friends and people experts in particular areas, as well as links to research too. And but for your own sake, your journey is quite extraordinary. When you do start a company at the age of 15, I believe you would have sold it by 21, and then scaling it kind of into just such a success story. And it kind of leads me to the point, but so you've achieved these accomplishments at such a young age. Like, I imagine there must have been a sense of pressure or expectation to keep achieving at that level. So it kind of gets me thinking about how you yourself help to redefine your own success.
Oh, for sure. So even, leaving the company, or even just continuing to grow. Basically, after I sold it at 21, there's like, did I peak at 21?
Yeah.
And then, you know, part of that is like, well, what is your definition of peaking? Like, what is your definition of what that success is that peaks at that age? I mean, yeah, I don't know if I'll sell another company at, although I did sell it again in 20, but as it so happened. But at this, as at the but kind of thinking like, okay, well, I hit a lot of success early in my life. Like, what does that mean? Will the rest of my life be less successful? And I think that you know really was what was making me question, how do we define success? Because when, and I talk about this in the book, there's Todd Rose from the think tank Populist. He has something called the Success Index, and what he shows in that is that internally we define success by connections to our family, and our community, and happiness, basically. And versus externally, we think everyone else only values like the wealth and the power and things like that. And so realizing that there is this difference between how you know how we, our experience of success, and when we feel success might be when we have happiness and flexibility and all of those things. But externally, there's still this kind of societal pressure to say, oh no, it's the wealth and money and things like that. And so that was a huge realization, that it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to define success that way. That's not for me. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, after leaving the meet group, I called one of my mentors, and I was talking to her on the phone. And in my head, I was like, okay, well, she's going to be, and I knew I wanted to stay home for a year with my daughter, and then of course I was writing the book that time too, and my daughter was 4 months old at the time, and I was telling her, I was like, I almost felt like I was like breaking the news to her, like I'm planning on staying home for at least a year. And she was like, yeah, you do that. That's amazing. That's what I did. And she shared this like, and it was so weird because I felt like I might be letting her down because, I was a good student. I was, I felt like I wasn't allowed as an ambitious person to make that decision and just be like, no, I want to be available for my kids right now. Like that's what season of life I'm in right now. And it was so amazing that not only did she 100% support that, but also it was so helpful just knowing that she made a similar choice. She had 4 children, and she became a tenured professor. And obviously, anyone who knows anything about being a professor, being a tenured professor is very difficult. But she was still be able to do that after or and while raising 4 children. But she took a different step in her career at the time she felt like she needed to. And I realized that's what could make sense for for me in this situation too. And so it was this realization, which is like, why am I looking for this external validation of like how other people define it when my happiness right now isn't tied to that type of work.
There's a few interesting things I'd like to unpack with what you just said. I guess the first is, how would someone pull themselves out of that? It almost feels like an external pressure, right? We might be promoting individualism, we might be promoting in terms of like trying to achieve the next job title. I would say there's pressure for everyone. There might be even more pressure maybe for women in this moment in time too, as they're trying to establish themselves in leadership positions. How does someone make the decision that is right for them without being kind of distracted by, we'll say, what society thinks we should be doing?
I think it's important to try to figure out how to block out the noise. And so, because it is so easy to, kind of be distracted by that. And, this was actually cut out of the book, but it was in one of my original drafts. But the scene that comes to mind, so there's a scene in Sex and the City when Charlotte York, if you're familiar with this, is trying to, she's trying to get pregnant. She did like some, what's it called when they stick the needles in you? Like
The
the
in vitro
blanking
is
on it. No. So I mean, that was what they stick a bunch of needles in you, and it's like supposed to help you relax, whatever. But it's like anyway, so but she was trying to find a way to find her like zen, and she couldn't like block out the noise from the street noise, and so she couldn't like meditate or whatever. And then she like goes out on the street, and someone's asking her, oh, you're trying to be pregnant. This is what this person did. They use these herbs. And like, she finally just zones it all out and realizes like, oh, I just learned how to block out the noise. And what I like about that, for anyone that's, is familiar with the show, it really shows that you're kind of in your head a lot and you're stressing out on these things. And all of those external opinions don't really help you in any way. So when we were building the company, what was helpful was actually that we headquartered it in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which was not where any other tech companies were headquartered. It's adorable river town. And it's a good hour from New York and an hour from Philly. And at the time, mid-aughts, everything that was anything was really located out in Silicon Valley. And
yeah.
so having our location there really meant that we were able to kind of focus on what was meaningful for our company. And we realized that like just having that space was super important. And so, taking that to your personal life, you can also create that space for yourself. Maybe that means finding ways to block out the noise in other ways. So a lot of people like to doom scroll, myself included. You might be like scrolling on Instagram and realizing it's like, you know what? Are you taking anything from this, or are you just kind of getting down on yourself? Because people are posting their highlight reels, and so you need to sometimes take that space from maybe the social media if that's a problem for you, or maybe even just from reading news stories, and actually take some time in your day to maybe reflect and figure out what you want to do. So maybe that's setting rules around how you use technology. Maybe that's saying, okay, past 9 p.m. I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to check my email before 10 a.m. or basically just setting rules for how you want to find ways to carve out space for yourself just to be able to think and to feel, rather than constantly being kind of inundated with outside opinions and pressures, because it's so easy to find those outside opinions and pressures.
Yeah.
And so it's important just to find the people, to find your own, and also to connect with the people that truly matter, the stakeholders in your life. So for me, that's my family, and that's the people you work with, and that's the people that the people you directly work with, and your friends, and having direct conversations about what your relationships are, and how you can and how you can all support each other, and what your goals are, and having those like real honest conversations, rather than trying to distill them from your perceptions of them based on like a Slack message or seeing something on
Yeah.
Instagram or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said about drowning out the noise, but sometimes a lot of that noise is actually from within as well, right? That we might assume people think a certain way, and it reminds me of a concept that you mentioned in the book, like similar, the liking gap. Where people tend to underestimate like how much or others like them or what they think of them after a social interaction.
100%. Yeah. So when you're in a new, and this is pretty much everyone does this. When you're, especially when you feel like you're a little bit of an outsider, it happens the most, but it can happen, in any social situation. So you're coming out into a group of new people, and most people assume that the other person likes them less, or that the other person will like them less than they do. And so what ends up happening is, because you have this perception that this other person isn't going to like you, you go into it with a little bit less warmth, with less friendliness, with less open to connecting yourself. You have your guard up, because you don't think they're going to like you. And because of that, you're and because of that, you're not having, it becomes this acceptance. It's called the acceptance prophecy, because what happens is, you confirm that, because now that you're being more guarded, less warm, less friendly, they don't like you as much as they would have if they had gotten you. And so you see this come up in other spheres. So obviously it comes up, like if you're doing business networking, it can come up. It can come up in dating. My husband and I joke that, like, if we were met on a dating app, we would not have swiped right on each other, because I would have assumed that he would not like me, because I am very, very nerdy, and I think I really overemphasize my nerdiness on my dating app profiles, I've noticed. But
Harry Potter references.
right, Harry Potter reference. Oh, come on, that's mainstream. But in general, being very over the top nerdy. And my husband is he would probably emphasize his music, and he's a musician, and he's in a band, and I would be like, oh, someone in a band's not going to be interested in me, which is like a weird assumption, not only about him, but about me, and about how he would perceive me. And that's kind of, but we do those types of things all the time. We assume someone's not going to like us just because of some random thing that we're wrong about, rather than going into the situation. No, and I remember on my first days of summer camp, in the elevator, I met one of my hallmates, and I remember my dad saying something like, "Oh, maybe we'll be friends." And in my head, I was like, "We're not gonna be friends." She became one of my best friends. So like
Wow.
that was, and it was like, and she had the same initial impression of me in that elevator, and it was a weird thing, because neither of us spoke. We were just like quiet in the elevator, and we're like, I don't think this is probably gonna make sense. But it ended up being a really good friendship. And so you have to be aware of what your snap judgments are, and just kind of leave it at the door, and come in just like assuming that someone will like you, because why wouldn't they?
Yeah, and that gets me on to in one of the chapters, which had a bit of a focus around workplace culture as well. I love the concept of engineering serendipity. And I think that's kind of what we're speaking to here. And I just think these ideas feel so relevant, not just in our work life, most definitely do, but life is so fast paced now as well. It almost, the way you were describing it, we're actually like shutting doors the way that we're acting, and we're like if we're being closed off, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally as well, but it could be affecting, yeah, some possible doors that we can be able to walk through. Like, from your point of view, what's one way to create serendipity in your life or your career?
One way is just to just be open to connection. And this is something that you see, obviously coming from a background of dating apps. That's one of the things that most matter there too, is like you find dates because everyone's looking to date. So that's like a natural thing.
Yeah.
Um, if you're looking for serendipity and to make more connections, then you can't be closed off to the world. So for instance, if you're taking a flight and you have your AirPods in and you're just like ignoring the person next to you, then you're automatically not going to have a conversation with that person. You're not going to find out anything about their background. You're not going to find out that, hey, you actually went to the same college and you have all this in common. And now, maybe you can, find, common ground to, talk about. You basically lose that aspect of just connecting with people. And so one is just being open to connecting and finding opportunities to do it. And so for an introverted person, that might mean you have like the scaffolding to help you support that. So maybe creating roles. Like one of my friends, she's a partner in a law firm. And when she is introverted, she would much rather, if she at night, be home in her jammies and watching a movie. That's what she would prefer to do. But she needs to get new clients and she needs to, do that aspects of her role. And so she always makes a goal when she's at these events. And they're always like good events, like with good food and stuff. But so she likes that aspect of it. But because she knows she won't otherwise like connecting with people, she makes a list before and she does the preparation before of the people she wants to make sure she meets. And then she makes sure to talk to them about, to ask them about something, to basically talk to them something about something in their life, to talk to them about something in work. And if neither of those can be followed up via email, with talk to them about something that could be followed up via email, because that way she, does her thing, she meets the people, and then she finishes her checklist and she can go home. So she likes the checklist, but she doesn't like the actual, the networking aspect of it. Because, a lot of people can find networking very icky.
Yeah.
And the reason that, and then there's research at the University of Toronto, the reason people generally find networking icky is because you don't really realize what you bring to the conversation. In the same way, I guess, of the liking gap, you think that you don't, especially in situations where you're maybe a newer, maybe you're less advanced in your career, you don't realize what you have to bring. And I kind of realized this, this gap, like, you can generally always be able to help someone. And I realized this when I was I went to Wharton, and in one of my classes, Total Leadership, what the professor has you do is you have to write out something that you need help with. And then other people in the class have to help you with that. And what you realize is that even though, and this was an exec MBA program, so everyone was coming from different industries. And despite that, everyone was able to figure out something that's, and people, what they needed help with was varying. Sometimes it was something career related. Sometimes it was like, I'm trying to buy a house in this area. So it ran the gamut. And what you would see was that it's like, oh, well, I don't know anything about this person's career. Like, I'm not a doctor. I can't help them with that issue. But I can help them with this. Or, oh, I actually know someone who did that. And you realize that you can make those connections, but only if you start kind of flexing that muscle and realizing that you can. And that's how you can really give back, even when there's and add to that social capital, even when there is kind of a disparity in your perceived powers. So one of the stories I tell in the book is about when I met Senator John Kerry.
Yeah.
And that, so I was at the DNC in, I guess, 2012, and I got to be there for some Young Entrepreneurs HuffPost event, and I went into this hotel because I was, I just was trying to kind of like regroup, figure out where I was, but I actually went right by security. I was definitely not allowed to be there, and I was loitering by the elevators. And I know I wasn't allowed to be there because the people who walked in right ahead of me were stopped by security and asked to leave, but they were distracted by those people, so I just kept going. Yeah, so I just kept going, and I was loitering by the elevators, kind of looking to see where I was going next. And John Kerry's coming up, and he has this like gaggle of people around him talking about like, so someone's saying like, oh, I love how you supported Bill S, and some numbers, and he's, having these like polite conversations with people, and then he comes over and exits the conversations to wait for the elevators. And he, I kind of just like look up at him and give like the like, hello, like the head nod. And he, because I didn't, the only thing I had to say to him would have been, oh, wow, you're John Kerry. You're really tall. Like, I really had nothing to say. I don't know any Senate bill numbers by heart. Like, that was, like, yeah, I didn't have anything to add there. And I was just on my phone. And then he looked at my phone and he complimented my phone case, which is a green monster case. Now, obviously, being a politician, he knows how to connect with people. And he found something. He's like, oh, tell me about, I've been thinking about getting an iPhone. Can you tell me about it? And I was like, oh, that's something I do know. I do know really well. I have apps. Like, and so he was using a BlackBerry at the time. So we got into this small conversation about the phones. I talked to him about my app. And, it was a very short conversation because then the elevator comes and, he gets in the elevator and I continue loitering. But he, I don't know if that conversation led into an allusion to me in Eva Longoria's speech, like later during the convention. It might have, I'm not sure, but she did basically mention the apps, and I think that having that mini conversation, it just showed us like I know nothing about like, or at the time I knew nothing about like the Senate bill numbers or whatever. But I knew the thing that I knew phones. That was something that he wanted to learn about. And so even in a situation where you're like, oh, I don't have anything to add to this person, you probably do. It might just be trying to figure out how to find it.
And from his point of view as well, like I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we've maybe, like if you saw the phone, for instance, I might think in my head, oh, I'd like to learn more about that. But sometimes we don't actually put it into action. Like I just sit in the elevator and just like head nod and then you just go off. So I thought kudos to him for being curious too and asking the question.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Especially because like, I'm sure he was exhausted because like, he's like just constantly, having these conversations. So it might've been refreshing to him that I did not pepper him with questions about different bills. Who knows? Maybe he was just like looking for something else to talk about.
And
But I'm happy to be that for him.
And from what I remember, your phone case was quite striking, right? It would elicit a conversation.
Oh yes, it was a green monster case. It was from Fab. If anyone remembers Fab, I loved that thing. I still have it actually. My kids play with it. It doesn't have a phone in it, but they just like playing with it because it's cute. It's a green monster.
Very good. I also was wondering when you mentioned BlackBerry, would there be a lot of younger people listening to this going like, what are they talking? Like, what's a BlackBerry? What do they mean? I think that's a really good, it's a good example though of serendipity, right? And kind of putting yourself out there. I think a lot of the time we have the fear of like, oh, no one's going to want to engage with me. I have nothing to bring or offer to the table. But like you said, even just putting it out there, you never know. It might even be like you have a friend who can help someone, but there's usually some connection or conversation that you can have.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that it's just important to kind of go into the conversations, looking for ways to help someone else. Cause you know, it's not just transactional. Like obviously, it builds your social capital. That's great. The majority of jobs are going to come from someone, someone you've networked with in the past. I think it's 80% of roles, are filled from someone's network. But, that's obviously not why you do it. You do it because it feels really good to connect with other people. Like as humans, that's just something that we've always, that as people we're drawn to do. It's something we're wired to do. And, building the Meet Group, our mission was, to make meaningful connections with people. It feels like, it was obviously an area I was student for. I was like, oh, this isn't just with dating. This is with everything. You need to be able to figure out how to meet people and how to make those connections. And sometimes you have to like, and the chapter is called Engineering Serendipity because a lot of times it is engineering it. It's not necessarily oh, these are the people you run into. Because if I'm going through my normal day, I don't really run into many people. I work from home. Like, I have to actually put myself out there. And that's something that we learned through building the company is that we did have to put ourselves out there, because of our location in New Hope, for instance. If we wanted to have a meeting with someone that was on the West Coast, something that we would do would we'd say something like, oh, we're meeting, we're going to be in California, we're going to be in California next week. Would you like to have a meeting? And it's like, we're pretending that we're going to be there. We're not. We're just trying to set up the meeting. If they say yes, then we're going to be there. Um, and that led into the ability to have so many more, connections and meetings than we otherwise would have, because, that type of connection, you have to create opportunities for yourself to find those connections, if they don't naturally come. And so that might mean, saying you're going to be someplace and then showing up if anyone else is going to be there too. Or, it could mean, if you're hot, if you have a hobby of playing soccer, like, joining a rec league in your town, trying to meet people in different ways, because, that's where the magic happens in terms of, making connections that can be incredibly meaningful for your life and even for you professionally.
Yeah, I really like that twist actually, that there has to be a certain amount, there a bit of intentionality behind it as well, versus just this like random you walking around the street, like trying to strike up conversations with people. You can be, if you want to call it strategic or intentional with it as well. I would say the caveat to that too is when it comes to these connections, according to your book as well, you have to be authentic and maybe vulnerable in ways too, because I think if you're being solely transactional, like if I came to you and said, Catherine, I want to meet you because I need to, like almost like a robot, I want to promote your book so I can get more followers, whatever it might be. Do you know, I think if there's not that innate kind of curiosity, or you bringing your full self to the table as well, it just won't come across as natural.
Right. And actually, so there's, a woman I met at Chloe Street. She has this company, Human to Human, and they make a card game basically. One of the things they do is they have this card game, and it has like prompts of like things you can say to someone. Like, you can play the game multiple ways. Maybe it's just trying to get to know someone better. Like maybe you're new in a relationship, you're trying to get to know a friend or a romantic partner or something on a deeper level. But you can also just use those in networking events. So instead of going and asking, "Hey, how are you?" and asking that to a million people, maybe ask, a deeper question like, "Oh, what was something someone told you that, like what was the best piece of advice someone told you?" I'm not sure if that's one of them, but one on the top of mind right now. And, it kind of changes how the person approaches it, because now they might give a more deeper answer. So if you ask deeper questions, you're going to get deeper answers. And that's also just like a helpful way of like going into those situations rather than keeping things at the surface shallow level, kind of going into, you know, the deeper waters. And sometimes, when meeting a new friend, that might be, you throw in like a kind of a deeper topic and you see how they respond to it. If they kind of like brush it aside and you're like, okay, they want to keep things shallow. If they're willing to, go a little deeper, then, that could be the start of a really meaningful connection. Um,
Yeah.
and so you
Um,
can kind of like test it out.
yeah, when you were speaking, usually if you do meet someone, how are you? Well, what do you do? And then, what's the weather like where you are? Or, so, like they're kind of like the three, I suppose, main types of topics or questions. And like you said, they really don't lend to much depth. They really don't lend to much learning about a person, really. Like you said, it's very like surface level. They'll probably tell you what their job is. They'll probably tell you they're good. I mean, maybe they'll like spill emotion out to you and tell you what's going on in their life, but I highly doubt it. So asking a question like that is really tapping into like what's on their mind as well and what they're curious about, and it just lends. You can kind of build off that then and have a more deeper conversation.
100%. And when you're connecting and you want to do authentically, you also have to be aware that the other person might have a reason they don't want to be authentic. Um, or, and it could be it could be that they're a little bit guarded because when they have been their authentic self in the past, it's backfired on them. And so, it's kind of on the person trying to make the conversation, make the deeper conversation, to make it a space where they feel that they can share. Um, and so that doesn't mean, if you're a leader and you want people on your team to be authentic and vulnerable, then you have to be authentic and vulnerable first, and maybe for a long time before another person will necessarily open up, depending on their past experiences. And so I think it's important to be aware of that. And also to realize that, some of the things that someone might not want to talk about openly is because they haven't come to terms with it themselves. And that's true of yourself too. So when you're going out there and you want to, be your authentic self, that's great. But if you have some work to do in terms of like how you feel about it and how you want to, like kind of almost spin it to come from a kind of an empowered place and come from a place where it's meaningful to you, and that you can move through. then you can't kind of usually be in the thick of it. So sometimes you have to just be aware of like where you are with it, like, and that might mean if you have, for instance, so something awful going on, like a cancer diagnosis, and maybe you're just not ready to talk about it yet. And you will be, and then you can be authentic about it when you are. But it doesn't mean that you have to be, wear your heart on your sleeve and just be open about everything. There's, sometimes you have to do the internal work first to come to terms with what this means and how you feel about things before you can open it up. And so for me, with my company, I kind of lived this like double life for a little bit in college where I didn't really tell anyone about my secret business.
So it's like Hannah Montana or something, a similar concept.
Exactly. I'm basically Hannah Montana. And or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She has this whole like
Oh
slaying
yes,
thing.
yes.
Uh, and I'm, and obviously this isn't like, but the reason I didn't want to talk about it was because I had some negative experiences in high school where I was like, oh, I don't know if I want in college, my experience at college, for this to be my thing. Because in high school, I had, some kids being mean to me because of it. And, that's, and I had to realize and kind of be comfortable opening up to people in school. And then once I was, I realized that Georgetown was actually an incredibly supportive place to be building a company. And it wasn't like high school in the way that, like, the people in high school, your affinity with them is that you share a zip code. In college is very different. You're much more choosing the people you're around, whether it be by your choice in classes because of your interest there, your choice in the college in general. So there's a lot more things there that can connect, that kind of are of a stronger tie that can make it feel more comfortable to open up, versus just like these are the people that happen to live in the
Right.
same geographic space as you.
Yeah, it can be, I guess when you're in college too, it is, like you said, it's a geographical thing when you're all in high school, and then in college, maybe you are kind of figuring out who you want to be a bit more expressive, and you kind of start realizing you want to be around people who potentially share the same beliefs and values of you, and you almost find like people that you connect with. The,
Right.
there is a question. It's kind of like a slight segue. I know you asked this in the book in relation to diving into like what you value in terms of where you want to spend your time. But you ask if you had an extra hour in the day, what would you spend it doing? I imagine maybe if you got to know a person well enough in this connection or this kind of like network or serendipity type meeting, you could ask them something like that. But I'd love to ask that question to you, Catherine. If you did have an extra hour in your day, what would you do?
Right now it would be some holiday shopping.
Very topical.
But yes, so the reason that I like that is because it's really showing like where you think your time should be best be going right now. And that can change every day. So obviously right now in the season we're in, like literally the Christmas, the holiday season, it's right now very taken up by, a lot of my mental space is taken up by like, oh, holidays are coming up, I need to be doing these things. Ask me in January, it's going to be, I want more time to be recording my audiobook, or I want more time to be, maybe promoting this, or I want to work on something specific. And it really highlights the things that are kind of, that are in your mind is like, this is what I should be working on. When I was at work at the Meet Group, that the thing that was usually on my mind was actually doing things with brand campaigns, which was interesting because a lot of my role was performance marketing, which is very much like you live in spreadsheets and Tableau, which is my happy place, and I could spend like days in the spreadsheet. I love it. I joke with my husband that I don't have necessarily strong passions about things. He's like, except for spreadsheets, and that's true. I do even have a Christmas holiday shopping spreadsheet, and it's fantastic, if I may say so. But anyway,
Wow, that is
I love
intense.
spreadsheets. It's actually great. I should share the template. But anyway, but what I think about like where my time is best spent in terms of just like, incremental change versus like big change. I realized that, no, it's like the brand campaigns, that's where the promise is. That's where, my efforts could be much better spent. And I think that that's, realizing where that extra hour goes and how you would spend it kind of highlights like what you think you're missing. And you're like, because it might be like, oh, it would be fitness. Maybe it'd be like going for a walk or a run or something. If you realize that that's the area that's missing from your life, then that's the area that you need to find out how to create that time for. And in the book, I give suggestions for how to start creating time in your life to fit those things in, so that you are prioritizing the things that actually really matter to you.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it you obviously want to give away, because I do highly
Oh, I
encourage
give away
people
all of it.
to get the book and read it. It's fantastic. Do you want to go through some of those tips and strategies?
Yeah. So one of my favorites, and this is something that that I know Noom talks about too, because it's like nice psychology research. Um, but it's basically habit bundling, and you start to realize that by combine. So there's research that basically showed if you gave students audiobooks and you told them to exercise and they could only listen to the audiobooks while they were like exercising, then they actually exercise significantly more because they wanted to finish the book. um, and that's that. But you can do that with with other things too. So for instance, I I enjoy treadmills. I'm one of those people that actually don't mind being a hamster on a wheel. So I like treadmills, and a lot of times like if I'm on there, like I'll be watching. That's when I watch like the like guilty pleasure TV,
Yeah.
like just complete crap. Or if I'm on a run, maybe I'm listening to like podcasts that it's something I want to listen to, but something that I need to carve out time to do. And so I try to combine things whenever possible um, to really make it so I could do two things at once. Because usually, yes, they say you don't multitask in the way that like you can't like be having two conversations at once, obviously. But a lot of times there's things that you're doing at the moment that that your mind is otherwise not occupied for. So even if it's, for instance, picking up my kids at school and I'm in the driving line, I would actually time box it and schedule it such that that was the time that I was actually like, during this time I will be thinking about this subject, and that might be my next that might be like when I was drafting the book, that might be I was figuring out the outline for the book in my head in the driving pickup line, or I was figuring out the outline for a newsletter in the driving pickup line, or any of those things, because it's something that otherwise it's just time in your day that you're not otherwise using. And I would like to use that time to reflect rather than necessarily to just be waiting in a car. So it was kind of easy time that I was able to kind of take back and figure out something to do with. Another way of creating time is really just realizing what things in your life can be broken down into smaller pieces and doing that smaller piece. So it's on my head right now because I'm working through annotating my book for my audiobook, which I start recording in January. And for that, every chapter I have to like go through, mark where I want to breathe, mark where I want to change my tone, things like that. What words do I want to emphasize? What words should I figure out how to pronounce before I have to say it in an audiobook? Um, and when I'm doing that, I realized at first I was just calendaring it just on my to-do list as like annotate audiobook. And now it's on there as like I'm actually scheduling time on my calendar. It's like annotate chapter 4, annotate chapter 5 is in here. And I'm finding like actual spaces of windows, because actually using that time boxing strategy has been incredibly helpful for me. And so that means breaking it into a smaller thing so that I actually make progress on it. Because if you just look at this huge mound of something you need to do, that can be incredibly demotivating because it's just
Yeah.
this mountain. So it's figuring out how you can take pieces of it and figure out how you can build from there. And so that's one of the that's an important skill, and just like how it can apply to like house, like real life too, is also figuring out like in our house. My husband and I keep a notes app, and like we have every cleaning aspect of the house, like bathroom, second floor vacuum, that type of thing, as its own thing. And we do them, rather than having a day where you have to somehow find a day where you need like 3 hours to clean the whole house. We try to just like knock out small elements of it, whatever time period, we just like mark it down. And that makes, keeping up with that type of thing much easier. But then another way of creating more time is, of course, to outsource. So we have like a cleaning person that would obviously free up all of that time. Or if you're at work, and this is an important one, it's figuring out how to delegate and how to outsource that to maybe to someone else on your team. And when thinking about delegating, it's so difficult for people to give up work. And I talk about this in the book, and I talked about this right now because I love spreadsheets. And so one of the things with my role that I realized I needed to delegate away was some of that day-to-day management of those performance marketing campaigns, because it meant like, what am I if I'm not doing that? Like, I love doing that. And so it was hard for me to do, but it was also hard for me to do because, like, even if you believe that the person on your team is fantastic at their job, which, they are, it's still hard because they're going to do things differently than you did. And so you have to come to that realization and be like, okay with that. Like, things are going to be different. That's fine. Maybe you have different KPIs that you can hit and you can agree on, and then those are there. And then you actually have to use that time differently. You can't just kind of have you can't just be peering over and making sure that it's doing it right. Like, for instance, if I'm loading the dishwasher at my house, my husband shouldn't be like hovering and be like, oh, are you really going to put that plate there? Like, obviously that's not going to be great. Full disclosure, though, he's very particular about how you load the dishwasher.
When you said it's not going to be great, I was just thinking, like, not great for him. He'd be in trouble.
But it's one of those things where it's, if you delegate something away, you actually have to fully delegate it away and realize the other person now has responsibility of it, not you. And you need to, allow that in your mind, because a lot of times when you're delegating, whether at work or even just at home and sharing the task of a house, you get in your own way because you're still too involved with the thing that you tried to get off your plate. And so it is an important shift to think it's not just outsourcing and delegating, it's actually also fully realizing that it's full ownership transfer of those items.
Yes. Yeah, ownership transfer is kind of where I was going to. If you're delegating but still micromanaging or picking, or you haven't delegated, like, you haven't done it effectively. It kind of ties me in as you were speaking. So much of it is decision making, right? You have boundaries and decision making, which are two key concepts in the book as well, and something I'd like to focus in on a little bit more as well. So when it comes to decision making, I know you mentioned the concept kill criteria. It can be difficult for people, because I know the sunk cost fallacy people fall into. Sometimes we're invested in something, we tend to double down, triple down. Like, I'm sure many businesses have gone under for that exact reason. They don't know when to pull the plug or when to stop or step back from a particular product. I just thought it was really interesting in decision making. How can people kind of tap into that kill criteria, I guess, both in a business sense, but also in a personal sense?
Yeah, so I think the idea, so the kill criteria, was, I believe, coined by Dr. Annie Duke. She's, not only is she, doctor, she's psychology, but she's a professional poker player, and on like world stages. And so the idea that how she uses it is kind of going in ahead of the head of the game, knowing when to quit ahead of time. So it's like, okay, if she's down by $2,000, then she knows that she should just stop playing, and also know when to fold and all of that. And that's kind of an important criteria, to know when your limit is, and you have to establish that before. So if you're kind of so say that you're at work and you're having like an awful time at your job, you might not know when is exactly the right time to quit, and or to look for things. And so it's important to like kind of make the assessment and think, okay, if things are still bad after 3 months, maybe that's when you do something about it, or that that's when you change it. Because like, obviously everyone has slumps, everyone has like times when things are just like not going well, and so you don't want to ever be too, there is something that's like resilience, and you don't want to be too willing to quit it at any point. But having that kill criteria lets you know when you should actually exit whichever space you're doing. So like, and that might be like, okay, after 3 months, if things haven't improved, then I'm leaving. Or it could be, even within a relationship, maybe you're trying to meet up with a potential partner. If they can't meet up within like a week, say, okay, I'm not wasting any more time chatting with them, I'm moving on, because I'm clearly not a priority for them. So let's move on if it's this hard to set up a date.
Catherine, what about if you're in a job or you're in a relationship that's bad, but like it's not too bad, like it's just not great? How do people know where to set the threshold for the kill criteria when it's kind of like, it's okay, like the job pays the bills, the relationship, I'm relatively happy, but not like super satisfied. Maybe that like gray area, people might find it difficult to be able to know when it is time to step back.
Yeah. So I would say like my answer for that probably is going to change versus for a relationship versus like for the
Yeah,
job.
yeah, yeah.
Because you should be thinking about like, each thing individually. So for a job that pays the bills that you're not hating and stuff, I mean, you might not have any reason to do a kill career. It depends what you want to get from that job more so than it does like what is your goal for your career? Is it to pay the bills and to, be moderately happy? Or do you want to do something that's like, no, it's really tearing me up that I'm not doing something that's super meaningful to me. And maybe that's your criteria. And then that your job isn't hitting that. And so then you could that would be a reason to look. But if your goal of your career is just to make money to pay the bills, then that's fine. If that's not, if you're in a gray area that you're okay with that gray area, then that's fine. If you're in a gray area that you're thinking that is a source of unhappiness in your life, then that's when it's not okay. And that's when you have to think, okay, well, what needs to change? And so in a relationship, if you're in an okay relationship, like that doesn't sound like a happy life to me.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
a way that like
absolutely.
an okay job, like you can be like, this is fine. And okay, I think in a relationship you might, have a much higher threshold for like, wanting to, be in love, for instance, is an important aspect. And you could also have that, criteria in a relationship. So maybe maybe if you're in a dating relationship and you want to get married and you're not moving towards that, then that might be an area where it's like, okay, this isn't the person for me. And so that's, when you would want to set some time, like, 3 months to assess, like, is this the person for me? And then move on. Because if your goal is to get married or something like that, and it's 3 months down the line and you hit that point, you're like, you know what? Still don't want to marry them. Then that's when you should leave, because otherwise it is kind of wasting both of your time. Now in the job, it again goes back to your goals. If your goal is to be like, progressing in whatever your role is, then maybe that's like, see where you are in a year. Are you progressing? If your goal is to do something meaningful in a completely different area, then that role, even if it pays the bills and hits other things, it's not going to satisfy that. And so you kind of have to look, because you're not going to have that aspect. So it's important to just kind of think of like each thing individually and what it actually means for your personal goals for what it is. When I joined, so I very briefly joined an organization, and it was, and it was a nonprofit. It was something I'm volunteering to do, and I had this awful experience where the person running the organization was actually just incredibly rude via email, and I was like, okay, maybe it was just a bad day. And then like a few weeks later, I'm like, I don't think this is a fit. And I left because there was, because sometimes you have to just realize it's like, okay, I gave it a few weeks, which I think is enough time to see like, oh, is this just how the person conducts themselves? And it's like, oh, I don't want to be, this area of my life was supposed to be about giving back to community and things like that. I don't want to be verbally abused via email. I'm going to just say no to that one. And so it's realizing like how, how those areas of your life fit in, and where, and how they can serve you.
Yeah, and what you did there is you set a clear boundary for yourself as well in terms of what you tolerate and won't tolerate. And boundaries intrigue me sometimes because they can come across as like selfish. Like if you're setting
Mm-hmm.
boundaries, people can see it as selfish. Do you have any advice or techniques for people out there when it comes to setting boundaries?
But first, I will say boundaries are not selfish, but that doesn't mean other people will like them. And so, you might have a boundary. So, and this comes up with like new parents law, for instance. You might have a boundary. It's like, okay, anyone that, like, no one at this event is allowed to hold my baby because there's too many people, and flu season, and that can be your boundary. Your Aunt Petunia might be upset about that, but that's on them. As long as that's what your clear boundary is. And they might be upset, and you might acknowledge that they're upset about it, but you can just you just have to accept it's like, no, I've set this boundary for a reason, and this is what it has to be. And so you have to move on from that at that point. If your boundaries aren't being respected, a lot of times that actually comes to you yourself and how you're upholding them and if you're being consistent with them. So for instance, if you're like at an event and your Aunt Petunia's sort of like, no, I really want to hold the baby. And you're like, okay, fine. And then you feel bad and they're like, and then you say, oh, that Aunt Petunia, she went all over my boundaries. Like, no, you did. You're the one that handed them the kid.
Yes.
So you have to hold them consistently. And so obviously this comes up in work a lot when it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to work after 6 p.m. or something like that. And then you're responding to emails and stuff after 6 p.m. What that signals to people is that you're actually available after 6 p.m. and why not message you? You might message them back. And so if it's something that's bothering you, then you need to actually be consistent with your boundary and hold it and actually communicate what they are. Because a lot of times, people might not, people aren't mind readers. They have no idea what your boundaries are. You have to tell people, no, this is what I'm going to do. And then actually follow through and do it. And something I talk a lot about in the book too is how to have boundaries without saying no, because these examples where it's like you can set a clear no is very different. But then, a lot of times, if in a role, if you're not the boss, it's harder to say no to your boss, or you can't say no to your boss because you might be fired. And then in that situation, what's helpful, I think, is there's two things. So there's it's having a boundary in your pause before you answer. So that means, and so that's is coming from Dr. Pooja Lakshmin, who wrote Real Self-Care. Definitely read that. It's fantastic. And what that is showing is, so if you are, say you're getting like so someone's calling, you're like, oh, I don't want to talk to this person right now. Let them go to voicemail so you can see what they want. Or, say they're sending you an email, rather than responding right away, really think and reflect about how you want to respond and how you want to change it. So when the way that Dr. Lakshmin phrased this was, when she was a resident, she had, she would, her phone call, she would be getting calls all the time. And, there's a lot of pressure in that community to just answer calls or return them right away. And instead, she would allow them to kind of go to voicemail and then figure out, oh, how do I want to prioritize these? Like, oh, that's a patient, they need me right away. This is just a paperwork concern, I can do that later. But if she had answered at the time, she would have felt a lot more pressure to just say, oh, I need to do that paperwork concern right now, even though it wasn't actually needed at that moment. So it gives you a little bit of space to actually figure out how you want to figure out how you want to actually connect with people and how you want to maybe agree to things or not agree to things, and think about what it could mean. So for you, maybe you want to do something, but you have to set a few ground rules, like, oh, I would love to do that with you, but I can only do it, after this time because of, whatever reason. And so being able to kind of basically have that pause to figure out how you want to respond is so important for just being able to not only enforce your own boundaries, but also just think about what they are in the situation. And the other piece of that is I heard from Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Indistractable, which is also a fantastic book. Definitely read that too. And, for him, you don't ask your boss, basically you ask your boss to help you prioritize what you're working on. You don't say no to your boss. You just say, okay, here are the things I'm working on this week. In order to fit this in, what needs to move? And so it highlights basically that you have, finite time, finite resources, and to actually work on those things, that are being piled on, you then need to reassess the priorities. And I think that that's a very clear way of showing that it's like, no, you'll do that, but it does mean that there is a trade-off, and that is so that something else might not be worked on this week. And I think that that's an important skill to just be able to realize that there are ways you can set these boundaries without saying no, and having the boundaries in the pause and having the boundary being to reprioritize are two really strong ones for how you can take these into other areas of your life, and have those boundaries even if you are personally very bad at setting boundaries.
Yeah, and it's such a key point for me is the boundaries. If they're, we'll say, being broken, that's on you a lot of the time. That example with the email is really good. If you respond to the email outside your work hours, you might have to think, oh, like Susie Jones always emails me outside of my hours like, oh, why is she breaking my boundaries? But the reality is it's you, because you're the one responding and not actually setting the boundaries. So yeah, not assuming that people understand or know your boundaries is another really good point. Katrin, I know you're going to time out here on Noon Vibe in 1 minute. I do have
Oh,
one
I'll go
more
back.
question for you when the time comes, and then I would love for you to tell people where they can find your book and perhaps where they can find you as well. So if
Mhm.
you'd like, I know that you I don't know, you might get this answered within the time frame, or you might have to click back in. But do you mind if I ask you the question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so very simply, just like definitely was inspired by your book, but from your point of view, what's the one piece of advice from designing success that you hope everyone would take away?
The one piece of advice I hope everyone will take away is to really foster connections with those around you, because I think that that's going to be just the most important aspect of how you're going to get through everything you need to get through. My last chapter of my book, it's called Roadblocks, and it's because everyone's going to hit roadblocks along their way, along their journey. And the way you get through those is having people who support you and having people in your corner who.
Catherine is on her way back in. I did not want to interrupt. Welcome back.
Thank you. Um, and and um, and so you're always going to hit roadblocks, and you need those people kind of in your corner, people who can support you. When we were building the company, one of the things that it's hard to maintain control of a company for 18 years. That's actually a feat in its own. And the reason we were able to is because we were always, we fought rationally within the people. So always, anytime that like we had a disagreement, we always, we were logical, we were rational, we weren't jumping into emotion to saying like something that you wish you could regret. We were always very kind of calculated in making sure that we might be disagreeing on something on a business term, but we're not disagreeing with the person, we're not disliking the person we're working with. And so as a result, we were worked with many competing companies. Some of them we acquired, but at times in our history we thought they might acquire us. And we formed these relationships in the space that really meant that we could that really meant that we had these tight ties. So then when we launched a B2B product, we had all these people that we could go to and work with because we had tight industry connections. And that wouldn't have existed if we didn't have hadn't fostered meaningful connections over the course of like 18 years. So yeah, you might not know how a connection can mean something for you 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And so I think as you're kind of navigating the world, you know treat everyone with kindness, because one, you should just do that as like a good person.
Yeah.
It will make your journey significantly easier and significantly less roadblocks. So say if someone reaches out to you and you're like, oh, I remember that person, they did this great thing for me, yeah, I'd love to work with them. Then that makes it that much easier when you do hit those roadblocks, which will be inevitable on your journey, because nothing's ever a straight path.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really good to get your insight, because it's definitely a theme that's interwoven throughout the whole book as well, like that power of connection.
Thank
All
you.
right. Where can people find you, Catherine? Where can people get your book? I know I have it on Kindle, but where else is it available?
Yeah, so it's a Kindle ebook. Anywhere online books are sold. So if you're a Barnes and Noble lover, it's there. It's on should be on Apple Books, basically anywhere you get your online books. If you want to request it in your local library, they can get it too. But you kind of need a library card at that library to request it. So would love it if you did that, if that's your reading style. But yeah, it's called Designing Success, Lessons from 20 Years as a Female Tech Entrepreneur. It will be on audiobook in a few months if that's more your jam. And I, love to keep in touch. I also have a website, cconnelly.me. That's CCONNELLY.me. And I have monthly office hours that, we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about marketing, we talk about um, sometimes dating advice, because, lots of years as a dating entrepreneur, as someone in the dating space, that naturally comes into it. But we have a fun time. So, feel free to join any of my office hours. I also have a newsletter called Growing Up Startup at cconnelly.substack.com. But yeah, look up my book, Designing Success. And then there's lots of other ways to connect with me, and lots of other things that, I hope I can help people with on their journey.
Very good. Yeah, I signed up for the newsletter. I also got a wonderful workbook in terms of
Oh, yeah.
for designing success as well. It's really
Okay.
detail orientated. Would highly recommend anyone to check that out and start filling it in. Catherine, honestly, look, full transparency, your book was awesome. You should be
Thank
really
you so
proud of
much.
what you've done. As I said at the start, lovely blend of kind of experts in particular fields, getting research. I really appreciated the connection that you actually have with your family, and obviously Jeff being the CEO of Noom. I thought that was really wonderful just to get an insight into the type of big brother that he is, and I can see that portrayed in his leadership style as well. So it really was nice, even for me to get the insight into that too. But yeah, so many key takeaways, so detailed. It's definitely a book that you'd read
Thank you
more
so
than
much.
once. You could just keep it with you indefinitely. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you jumping on and yeah, sharing about your book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And thank you so much for the opportunity.